of poaching threaten the existence of the African giant, the elephant, here in Kenya and across the continent. The illegal trade of ivory is flourishing and the red line has been crossed. Seeing the extinction of the jumbo could be a reality in our time. But will a new wildlife bill be the panacea Kenya needs to keep poachers' hands off these magnificent creatures? This is Perspective, and the show starts right now. Who killed the Mombasa-based Muslim cleric Sheikh Aboud Rogo? The answer is as elusive as it was on the day he was murdered a year ago. Here now is headline versus bottom line on the subsequent inquest into his murder. This week's headline, a task force that was looking into how Mombasa-based creature Aboud Rogo was killed has released its findings. The 71-page report, however, fails to unravel who was behind the broad daylight killing of Aboud Rogo along the Malindi-Mombasa highway. The task force chairman, Jacob Ondari, has categorized the incident as murder. The task force has recommended a public inquest, but here is the bottom line. It doesn't take a scientist to tell you that Aboud Rogo was murdered. The over 17 bullets pumped into his body confirm that. Rogo was shot dead a few meters from the Bamburi police station where officers heard gunfire. The sound of 16 bullets fired in succession, no less, would be a concern for any law-abiding security agent. How is it that the officer in charge of Bamburi police station never bothered to investigate what happened at his doorstep? And why did he send a traffic officer to the scene to inquire what happened? Why then, after the establishment of the fact that he was murdered, would the task force recommend an inquest rather than a full-on criminal investigation, or at least have an inquest run parallel to an investigation? The history of inquests in Kenya are almost as murky as the murder of Rogo itself. The Malindi inquest, where police officers were found liable for the murder of 5 people, again in broad daylight, didn't lead to their arrest or their charging in court. Why would this inquest be any different? That's headline versus bottom line for this week. Now on to our main feature. When Kenyans saw the descent of the Union Jack in 1963, the elephant population stood at over 167,000. Fast forward to half a century later, and the number of giant animals roaming around in our wild is just under 38,000. This decimation of the elephant population has the pockets of poachers full, but at what cost to the nation? In what proponents say is a solution to end poaching, the Wildlife Conservation and Management Bill 2013 is now in the pipeline. It proposes stiffer penalties for poachers and their accomplices. But as Wilkista Nyabwa, who makes a debut on Perspective tonight, explains, some wildlife conservationists are already raising the red flag over the controversial practices of cropping and culling of wildlife herds, which isn't explicitly outlawed in this bill. Here's this week's feature, Don't Crop, Don't Cull.
The sound of human footsteps blends with the sounds of the wilderness as man wanders deeper into forest territory in search of a group of animals who are becoming increasingly difficult to spot despite their size. The path opens out to an enclosure hidden away from prying eyes. This corner right in the heart of the city serves as a playground for baby elephants. In an increasingly hostile world, they find refuge at the Sheldrick's Wildlife Trust, established in a corner of the Nairobi National Park. Each elephant has a story to tell, their stories as familiar to Edwin Lusichi as the back of his hand.
This elephant is about 4.5 years old. We always name them after the place we rescued them. Her name is Murera and she was rescued from Meru National Park. And she was found falling down a trap that had poisonous spike. We've got this elephant, her name is Kwanza, and she was rescued from Amboseli National Park. She was found standing or protecting or guarding her mother and 2 other female elephants. She's now almost 2 years old. and we believe she'll be able to go back into the wild. But it took her a long time to settle down in the nursery, just because she saw what her mother and the rest of the family members went through. This is the youngest elephant we've got in the nursery now. His name is Lemoyan. He's only a year old, and he was rescued from Amboseli National Park, but he was found fallen down a well.
Though the circumstances that led them here are different, there is a common string that binds them all together.
These elephants came in the nursery because they are orphans. And they've been orphaned from different types of reasons. Some of the mothers have been killed by poachers due to increase in the trade on ivory.
Elephants below the age of 2 cannot survive on their own in the forest, as they need mother's milk to sustain them. When their mothers died or went missing, these 26 elephants were rescued and brought to the shelter. Here they shall remain until they are 3 years old, after which it is time to rejoin the great elephant population. At this point, they are taken to a rehabilitation center in Savo East, where they are introduced to various groups of wild elephants and allowed to select which family they would like to join.
It takes them a minimum of about 5 years in Savo before they get adopted in these different groups of wild elephants. And it takes 5 years because elephants will always stay in groups and families. So our orphans need to convince the wild families before they can be adopted.
While they are here, the security of the 26 orphaned elephants is guaranteed, but questions abound as to what awaits them once they leave the shelter. Baby elephants are not targeted by poachers. Elephant tusks begin to grow when the elephants are 2 years old and mature as they get older.
Most babies are losing their mothers because the poachers are interested in their ivory.
50 years ago, Kenya secured her independence with an elephant population of 167,000. Today, just 38,000 remain, and poaching incidents are on the rise across the African continent. In July, officials at the port of Mombasa seized 3.2 tons of ivory, the largest of its kind in recent times, following a spate of small seizures. It was believed that the consignment had been smuggled from Uganda. Later in July, another consignment of ivory weighing about 1,500 kilograms was netted by police. It was hidden underneath dried fish to throw off sniffer dogs. Earlier in the year, the poaching menace hit closer for many Kenyans. On January 5th, while Kenya slept, poachers killed 12 elephants in the Savo East National Park. The bullet-riddled carcasses were found at Busadi area of the park, with the tusks removed. Conservationists termed it the country's worst poaching incident in close to 20 years. It sent a jolt through Kenyans.
Illegal ivory traders, some analysts say, could also be pushing up the demand for ivory by stockpiling, hoping to make a kill just in case CITES orders a one-off sale.
Kenya imetajwa kuwa miongoni mwa mataifa 7 ulimwenguni yanayoshiriki vilivyo katika kusafirisha pembe za ndovu hadi katika mataifa yaliyo katika bara Asia.
But more was to come. In March, a Chinese smuggler was apprehended at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport with 439 pieces of ivory. The Chinese national was fined 30,000 Kenya shillings and released, and thus began the renewed call for a tough new wildlife law. The Wildlife Conservation and Management Bill 2013, which is now in the pipeline, proposes stiffer penalties for poachers and their accomplices.
The Wildlife Bill 2013 is an improvement of the CAP 376. CAP 376 is very weak when it comes to fines and sentences. And if I could remember well, the highest fine that has ever been applied, or that someone has ever been fined for committing an offense under the Wildlife Act, is 65,000 shillings. And the number of people who have been fined 65, we can count them. They don't number. I think there are only 2 people or 1. Most of the other guys committing wildlife offenses get away with little fines, and it does not matter whether you have ivory amounting to how many millions. Wildlife crime is treated as minor offenses.
Currently, poachers incur a fine not exceeding 40,000 shillings or a prison term not exceeding 10 years or both. A kilogram of ivory has a black market value of about 210,000 shillings, meaning such fines are a drop in the ocean for poachers. If the bill were passed into law, poachers could be sent to jail for 15 years and fined 5 million shillings for the illegal killing of wildlife.
Up next on Perspective, is the legal market of wildlife products the funnel that feeds the illegal market? We explore the consumptive use of wildlife. Perspective is back after this short break.
Proponents of the Wildlife Bill 2013 say they support it owing to the stiff penalties it proposes for poaching. It does, however, have provisions for two other proposals, and these are culling and cropping. And while conservationists say that these two proposals do not necessarily target elephants, they do fear that they could open the door wide for poaching of already threatened species.
Cropping, as defined in the bill, is a harvesting of wildlife for a range of products, while culling means the selective removal of wildlife based on ecological scientific principles for management purposes. These two ideas have proven contentious. For decades, wildlife use in Kenya has simply targeted persons who enjoy gazing upon them. The legalization of cropping and culling would mean that one could get a permit to kill or sell off animals when their population increases beyond the carrying capacity of their environment.
If you have wildlife in your piece of land, it can even be in protected area or in community lands, that you can actually kill some of them for purposes of selling and getting something in return. Now, these are some of the incentives that are in the draft bill that will then be there to insensitize the communities for them actually to be able to host the wildlife.
These kinds of images have often shocked the country each time communities living with wildlife rise against the animals. With over 70% of wildlife living on private land, human-wildlife conflict is bound to occur. From the killing of domestic animals to the destruction of crops, communities have horror tales about their encounters with some of the most prized wildlife species. And this appears to strengthen the case of proponents of consumptive use of wildlife. But it is not the first time that the idea of cropping has come up. In 1990, the Kenya Wildlife Service embarked on a pilot wildlife cropping program. Landowners had pressured the service to permit consumptive use of wildlife, claiming that several species had increased beyond the carrying capacity of their land.
Animals are not spread across the country in a uniform manner. So when we talk of carrying capacity, we'll have to look at an ecosystem like Amboseli, Savo, Laikipia, count the animals, and the scientists will be able to carry out their own scientific calculations of the productivity of the land and determine how many animals of what particular species need to be carried by that. And remember, when calculating the carrying capacity, we will consider, say, buffalo. When we are looking at buffalo, we don't consider giraffe because they don't compete for food. The giraffe eats from the treetops, the buffalo eats from the ground. But if we have hippos, then hippos will impact on the number of buffaloes we can have.
The cropping activities were to be overseen by KWS and implemented by partners engaged in cropping and dealing in wildlife products. The pilot was to run for 5 years in Samburu, Laikipia, Nakuru, Machakos, Kajiado and Lamu, after which it would be evaluated to determine whether to discontinue or expand. In actual fact, the pilot program ran for 13 years. A study would later find that poaching increased throughout Kenya during the cropping program. Methods used to count animals were also unreliable, and the criteria used in allocating quotas was vague.
Where the illegal cropping activity was taking place, the communities also kept on wondering, why are others granted the rights and we are not? And we saw also the illegal activities begin to increase. Now, there's a very thin line here. Our argument then was, this legal cropping program has actually insensitized the illegal activities and has motivated other people to start killing. Now, while they were committing an illegality, to them, the others were allowed to do it. So why are we punished for doing it?
In theory, wildlife cropping should not be a major concern. It typically targets large populations of herbivores such as the wildebeest, zebras, impalas and buffaloes. But a section of conservationists fear that opening that window could have many unintended consequences.
Here is a person with a gun, and you've given him authority to go for the herbivores. And he sees an elephant or a rhino there, he will be tempted too. And believe me, they will do it. Whether there is an officer with them or not, in the past they did it, they will still do it. Because there is more money on the high value wildlife than on this other one.
So there are strict measures also in the bill, like the case of keeping records is actually embedded in the bill, so that it is the work of Kenya Wildlife Service to follow up, to know what records there are for cropping and culling, and basically to see if people have gone overboard beyond the permit allowance.
One of the reasons why cropping was stopped previously was because we found that policing it was so difficult. You issue so many ranches with quotas, but you have no mechanisms for policing to ensure that the quotas you have given are adhered to. So a lot of times you find that you allow a ranch, say, to cull or to kill 10 zebras in a year. They end up killing 100. You have no mechanisms for enforcing. As I talk now, I do not think we have built that mechanism.
And once the poaching begins, the trophies find easy markets. Thailand and China are the biggest ivory markets. The ivory is made into trinkets and is believed to have medicinal properties.
The legal ivory market is actually driven by the illegal. So as you make something legal, there are other guys who know how to get it illegally, and they will get it illegally and then feed it into the legal market.
East Africa has always shied away from the question of consumptive use of wildlife, but South Africa has embraced it. Southern Africa has by far the largest known number of elephants in any region. Eastern Africa holds just over 28%, Central Africa 17%, and West Africa 1.6%. In 2008, while most of Africa was struggling with its herds, South Africa was making plans to allow culling to begin again after a 14-year ban. It was reported that conservation measures had been so successful that elephant populations were booming. At the Kruger National Park, elephants had increased from 8,000 to more than 13,000, their numbers taking a toll on the environment. But culling had been banned in 1995, and South Africa had to find alternative means to deal with the herds. The frequent culling in Southern Africa means that countries such as Namibia, Botswana and Zimbabwe often have large stockpiles of legal ivory in their custody. Disposing of these, even through legal channels, often fuels a much wider market, even in countries such as Kenya, where elephant populations are dwindling. But a section of conservationists now argue that this time round, Kenya is ready to handle the responsibility that comes with consumptive use of wildlife.
There will be set regulations that will be very strict, and also Kenya Wildlife Service will monitor that. If you are cropping, you will not just crop. The Kenya Wildlife Service will accompany you through their rangers, through their scouts, so that they really follow up to see if what is stipulated in the agreement is what one will do. The bill has actually gone through a very thorough process of review. A good number of stakeholders have been brought on board, and I think the penalties that lie therein, if really implemented, would deter poaching and also illegal means of handling wildlife. I think 6 or 7 years for a piece of legislation to undergo review is quite overboard. So if it would get to Parliament, within the course of this year and get enacted, I think we'll have achieved a lot.
As the debate rages on, the elephant numbers continue to fall. Kenya has the fourth largest population of elephants in Africa, only 38,000. Tanzania has just over 100,000, and it is estimated that every 15 minutes, somewhere in the world, an elephant is killed, meaning in the next decade, elephants could become extinct. Playtime is over for the elephants at Sheldricks. Now they set off out of their enclosure and into the park where the world is waiting to meet them. A section of tourists have travelled thousands of miles and brought with them children and grandchildren to catch a glimpse of an animal whose numbers are falling. They know that decisions made in the next few years may make the difference as to whether they will find the elephants when they next come to visit.
Because of our heritage, so stand up, fight for next generation's inheritance now.
If there are corrupt officers who are there, they will going to cooperate with the poachers and going to harm the whole of wildlife. So the best thing first, after sacking them, now when you're coming up with a bill, and that bill will not going to favor, or the bill will going to punish severely those who come and poach.
We need to do civic education. As I say, we need to do civic education. Number 3, we need to empower our people not to hide out those who are sponsoring the killing of the wildlife.
The government should initiate some program whereby from class 1 to class 8, the children are taught the importance of wildlife.
We should raise more funds to protect the forest, because these animals run away because they're not protected. They're not living in a protected area, so they seem to find where they feel safe. That's why they attack the communities that live around the reserves.
Thanks for sending us your feedback on Perspective, and you can continue to do so. You can tweet us on @KTN Perspective, but you can also tweet our show producer Kasim Mohammed on @KMohammed, that's Mohammed with 1 M, or tweet me on @JohnAlanamu. As always, we look forward to putting your week in perspective next Wednesday. I'm John Alanamu. Good night.